With the permission of the doctorate board and in order to obtain the degree of doctor from Radboud University Nijmegen, I would like to defend in public my dissertation entitled Addressing Health Literacy by Designing, Evaluating, and Implementing Pictorial Health Interventions. So thank you all for joining me today. My name is Danielle Schubbe, and as another time to say it, I will be presenting my thesis on addressing health literacy by designing, evaluating, and implementing pictorial health interventions. I wanted to start this presentation by recognizing all of the diverse stakeholders that I engaged in the work of this thesis, ranging from patients, clinicians, researchers, and more. Although they're not all pictured here on this slide, their participation was a crucial component of this thesis, and I couldn't have completed it without them. So as an outline for this brief presentation, I will first provide some background on my thesis, outline my research questions, and provide an overview of my findings. I will then visit each research question and its associated study, and at the end, quickly revisit my findings and provide a conclusion. So let's get started. Health literacy is a degree to which individuals can obtain, process, and understand basic health information and services needed to make appropriate health decisions. There are high rates of limited health literacy across the world, including US and European populations. It's important to address health literacy as most health information is written. Limited health literacy can also have negative effects on health behaviors and outcomes, like lowered ability to use medications appropriately. Previous research shows that using pictures might improve understanding of health information, and that shared decision-making and established decision engagement approach improves patient outcomes. My thesis addresses a gap and builds upon previous research by combining these two mechanisms, pictures and shared decision-making, to address limited health literacy. My thesis addresses 4 research questions. The first question is, what is the effect of pictorial health information on health behaviors and outcomes, particularly for people with lower health literacy? The second question is about outlining the process to create an acceptable text-based and picture-enhanced conversation aid, which is an effective tool to engage patients in shared decision-making. My third question is about examining how well text-based and picture-enhanced conversation aids are used and its effect on shared decision-making. Lastly, I inquire into factors that promote the long-term use of text-based and picture-enhanced conversation aids. The findings that I want to highlight are that pictures and health information improves understanding, especially for people who have limited health literacy, and that using a community-based approach and regularly engaging stakeholders for feedback ensures the acceptability of a conversation aid. Using conversation aids well is associated with higher shared decision-making, and adapting conversation aid delivery and use to pre-existing clinical workflows and using them in a flexible manner can promote long-term use. So how did we get to these findings? To address my first research question, I planned and conducted a systematic review and meta-analysis of randomized controlled trials that assessed the effect of pictorial health information on health behaviors and outcomes. Using a broad search strategy, and after a thorough review for inclusion, 54 studies were included in the systematic review, 42 in the meta-analysis, and 12 focused on people with lower health literacy and were analyzed separately. So I found that pictures moderately improved understanding and recall, but this effect was particularly stronger for people with lower health literacy. I did not find an effect on adherence, and one main takeaway is that icons with few words may be the most helpful in conveying health information, although these results should be interpreted with caution as there was significant heterogeneity. To address my second research question, I conducted a multi-phased community-based study to create acceptable conversation aids for uterine fibroids treatment options in 5 diverse implementation settings. I started the study by adapting a text-based conversation aid and then creating a picture-enhanced version. Spanish translations of these conversation aids occurred throughout the study as the content changed in the aid themselves. I also conducted a focus group with project stakeholders and user testing interviews with uterine fibroids patients. I also documented changes that were made to the conversation aids throughout the study. And so through multiple channels for feedback, we did find that changes to the conversation aids were requested by patients, clinicians, and the team during implementation. Changes were mostly made to ensure that the evidence in the conversation aid reflected real-life practice, including adding and deleting treatment options as needed. I also found that using a community-based approach takes time and resources, but that regularly engaging team members for that feedback is necessary for the usability, acceptability, and sustainability of the text-based and picture-enhanced conversation aids in the implementation settings. My third research question addresses the use of a text-based and picture-enhanced conversation aid for early-stage breast cancer surgery treatment options in the context of a randomized controlled trial called What Matters Most. In the trial, breast surgeons received training on shared decision-making and how to use their randomly assigned conversation aid. We then collected 184 audio recordings of these surgical encounters. The recordings were rated using a fidelity checklist that was adapted from a meta-analysis, which was scored from 0 to 11, and then a measure of observed shared decision-making called option 5, which is scored from 0 to 100. And then from those recording transcripts, I assessed how well the surgeons used the conversation aids and then explored the relationship between how well they were used and shared decision-making. So I found that about 2/3 of recorded encounters met or exceeded our defined threshold for sufficient use. Sufficient use was determined by the research team as meeting the core components of conversation aid use that was provided in the training. Explain it, give it, use it. This includes whether the assigned conversation aid was actually used during the encounter, whether it was used to facilitate a shared decision-making discussion, whether the surgeon explained the layout of it, and whether the content was ultimately reviewed, either by the patient on their own or the surgeon was explaining, going over it together. After conducting multivariate regression, accounting for clustering by surgeon, and controlling for variables that affected fidelity, I found that the better a conversation aid is used, the higher the shared decision-making. My fourth and last research question is addressed by a qualitative study where I explored factors that would promote long-term use of those early-stage breast cancer conversation aids from the What Matters Most trial. We conducted 73 interviews with patients, surgeons, and other stakeholders. And then I conducted framework analysis using normalization process theory, but more specifically the NOMAD instrument, which provides, just for me, clearer definitions associated with MPT's constructs and components. So I found that surgeons reported the conversation aids enhanced their usual care, and patients perceived this use as normal practice. Stakeholders, including patients and clinicians, also suggested that these conversation aids be used in future care, and that the factors of adapting the delivery and use of conversation aids to pre-existing clinical workflows, promoting the flexibility of using them, and taking into account patient characteristics and communication preferences as factors that would promote long-term use of the conversation aids. As an overview of 4 research questions and studies, my thesis provides a comprehensive investigation into pictorial health information's impact, development, and implementation in shared decision-making, focusing on health literacy. To just quickly reiterate my findings, pictures and health information improves understanding, especially for people with lower health literacy. Using a community-based approach and regularly engaging stakeholders for feedback ensures the acceptability of a text-based and picture-enhanced conversation aid. Using conversation aids well is associated with higher shared decision-making, and adapting their delivery and use to pre-existing clinical workflows and using them in a flexible manner will promote long-term use. My main conclusion is that adding pictures to conversation aids to facilitate shared decision-making discussions could effectively address health disparities related to limited health literacy. I want to give a special thanks to my PhD supervision team who guided me throughout this whole process. I also want to thank the co-production laboratory, which has been my research home since 2017. Thank you as well to my manuscript committee for taking the time to read my thesis and join me today for this defense. And lastly, I want to thank my family who have supported me throughout this process and who I'm very grateful are here today. Thank you.